And here we go. We are live. I always give it kind of just a second of me kind of dancing around for a minute while we let people tune in and look at there. We got people tuning in. All right.
Wow.
Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'm Amber Taylor from One More Page Books. I am just going to do a little bit of housekeeping and some introductions, and then I'm going to hand it over to all of our wonderful guests here tonight for their conversation. For those tuning in on Facebook, if you would like to ask a question or comment, go ahead and do that in the comments field. If you're on YouTube, the best place to do that is in the chat area, not the comments area. So that's the housekeeping. We're going to have a conversation, and then we will get to questions later in the hour. But feel free to pop the questions in anytime. I'll make sure that we go back. If a question comes in early, we'll still get to it towards the end. And that's the housekeeping. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm actually not in the store at the moment, in my basement. But we are working at One More Page really hard to try to get our doors back open so that people can come back in and browse books, and we cannot wait for that to happen. We've been closed the last few days for painting, so we've been doing a little bit of it's not really remodeling, although we did knock down a wall, so I guess there is a little remodeling going on. But super excited to welcome everybody back in. Hopefully we'll have a date to announce maybe in a week or two. So we're still working out those details. So tonight we are here with Pete Davis, author of the new book, Dedicated. I'm going to do a brief introduction of Pete and then all of our guests tonight. Pete Davis is a Falls Church local. And this is his, I believe, first book, Dedicated, The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. I saw you got a wonderful write-up in the New York Times, so congratulations on that as well. Pete is a writer and civic advocate who works on projects aimed at deepening American democracy and solidarity, which obviously is very needed right now. He's the co-founder of the Democracy Policy Network, which is a state policy organization focused on raising up ideas that deepen democracy. His Harvard Law School graduation speech, which was just 3 years ago, has been viewed more than 30 million times. So lots of people have been hearing his words, and lots more now will get to read those words. And all three of Pete's guests tonight are fixtures in the Falls Church community. So some of you tuning in probably already know them, but I'm going to do a very quick introduction of each, and I'm sure you'll hear more about some of the work that they have all been doing as well during the conversation. Marybeth Connelly is fully embedded in Falls Church. She serves on the city council as the vice mayor. She's also the community outreach director at Falls Church City Public Schools. And I liked your note, Marybeth, that her super short commute is very beneficial because there is a gas shortage going on in our neck of the woods. Hannah Jordan is a language teacher in Falls Church, teaching English as a second language, as well as family literacy, French, and Spanish. She is the former chair of the board of the Falls Church Homeless Shelter and is involved in a lot of other volunteer activities. I had to cut that one down so we can keep going. I did love that your claim to fame is that Pete was one of her middle school students. You guys go back a ways as well. And finally, Nikki Henderson. She is the former executive director of Falls Church's premier civil rights organization, the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. She was born and raised in Michigan and relocated to our area when she was getting her doctorate at the University of Maryland, and said she's volunteered during her entire life and finds that it brings peace and clarity to her life and the world around her, which sounds a wonderful description of volunteering. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I'm going to pop out of here. I'll still be in the background.
Thank you so much, Amber. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Hannah, Marybeth, and Nikki for being on our panel today. I'm so glad everyone is here to talk about this, my new book, Dedicated, The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. But mostly, I don't really want to talk. I want to take part of it to answer questions and talk a bit about the book. But the reason I've invited these guests here today is I want most of the talking not to be by me, but by actual long haul heroes who have dedicated their lives to causes and institutions, and very near and dear to my heart, our wonderful Falls Church community. And I'm so glad to have this event be hosted by One More Page Books, which is another example of a long haul institution that is dedicated to our town and building a community of readers in our town. But I'll start, the way we're going to do this today is I'll start a bit talking about the book. Then I will have a bunch of questions about the commitment journeys of Hannah, Marybeth, and Nikki. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, both for the panel and about the book. So it'll be a mix of kind of the ideas in the book and practical experience and wisdom and advice. And the hope for this event is the same hope I have for people who read the book, which is that you come away from it feeling grateful for the long haul heroes that built all the precious things around us, and encouraged to start your own long haul journey or stick to your own long haul journey of dedication yourself. So let me start a bit with why I wrote this book. As I was growing up, I kept getting two different messages, and this book is an attempt to rectify those messages. So the first message I got in some of my formal schooling, especially in college and grad school, I didn't have this as much at our wonderful Falls Church schools, was this constant message to young people to keep your options open, that the purpose of what you're doing now is to prepare for the next thing. And that, if you're going to get a job, you should get a job that helps preserve for your next job. Or don't speak out too much because it might hurt your career prospects. Or don't settle down to that place or settle down with that person because you don't know what's around the corner. The message was keep your options open. And I think, when I gave the speech on this theme of keeping your options open, it really resonated with people because they heard that, a lot of people my age hear that message all the time. But as I was also growing up, Mark Twain always has that phrase, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education. So some of my schooling told me, keep your options open. But I had a different type of education as I was growing up, which was, first, I started looking around at all these problems we were facing. It's there's a lot of darkness in America and in the world today. A lot of people my age feel that really heavily, that we're in a very confusing time. Community is in decline. Many institutions are corrupted or languishing. Politics is very clearly a mess, though I think many listeners would agree a little less of a mess than it was maybe a year ago. And there are all these global challenges that we're facing. And when you start reflecting on that, you start thinking, if we have a bunch of people keeping their options open, we're not going to be able to tackle any of those challenges. We're not going to be able to get out of this mess. We're not going to be able to rebuild communities or revive institutions or fix our politics or advance important justice struggles. That's not going to happen from people keeping your options open. So that doesn't make sense if we're being told to keep our options open. The other big thing is when I started looking at the heroes that made the world go round, the heroes that totally inspired me, including 3 here today. And people who have advanced causes, people who have mentored kids, people who have helped communities grow and develop, people who have mastered crafts and been really inspiring artisans of different crafts. They're the ones who didn't keep their options open. They're the ones who made a commitment and tied themselves down a bit to a particular thing, to a particular cause or community, craft or institution, place or person, even on the person-to-person level. And so I wanted to write a book that kind of corrected that message of keep your options open, and instead was a case against keep your options open and a case for committing for the long haul and becoming a long haul hero who worked at something for a long time. And also give tribute to the long haul heroes who dedicate themselves to things. So to close this out and kind of transition to our next part, a huge part of this, and I write about this in chapter 6 of the book right at the beginning, is the reason I care about this so much, and I particularly am someone who was interested in writing this book, was I grew up in this town that is filled with long haul heroes. filled with dedicated people committed to things bigger than themselves. And I'd love to read my paragraph that kicked off the false church section of the book to close this out. And then we're going to throw it over to some false church long haul heroes. I also grew up in a town, Falls Church, Virginia, that had a strong identity. It had a small school system and a rich civic life, especially for children. Boy and Girl Scouts, Operation Earthwatch, youth soccer and Little League every Saturday morning, the Falls Church News Press at everyone's door every Thursday, the Fall Festival in October, the Memorial Day Parade in May. Behind every beloved institution in town was a dedicated person. Howard Herman helmed the weekly farmers market. Nikki and Ed Henderson, one of whom is joining us here today, were in charge of the annual Blues Festival. Nick Benton kept the news press running. Barb Cram kept the local art show going. Sue John kept the preschool open. That is, the heart of this whole book, in a concrete example, which is that the message I'm trying to say is that the world, the thing that makes the world go round are people who are dedicated to turning ideas into realities, to being there for other people, to advancing causes, to stewarding ideas that were done in the past and keeping them going, to honing crafts, to loving places. The patriots and companions and builders and stewards and citizens and artisans that make up what I call the counterculture of commitment. They are our hope. And so that is a brief summary of Dedicated. We'll get more into it as we go into questions, but I'd love to turn it over from me talking in lofty words about this to people who actually live it. So I have a few questions for our long haul hero panel. I've chosen each of you because you are such great examples of people I have seen throughout my whole life in Falls Church of that make our little corner of the world go round, from the homeless shelter to the Tinner Hill Heritage Festival to the City Hall, to all the things outside of your main things that you also volunteer for and show up for. So I'm so glad you're here. So I'd love to just get started, just to have everyone get to know you who doesn't already. For the people in Falls Church, I bet most of them know you, but for the others, I'd love to hear about, a lot of this book is about the first moment when you dive in and encouraging people to click off the menu screen of life and pick a movie, to leave the hallway of life and enter a room and settle in for a bit. And so I'd love to hear about an example of the origin of your commitments to our community, or to one or all of your community building and justice advancing projects. I'd love to hear about that moment when you first started diving in. What led you to be someone who did that? What was the moment when you first got involved? What were those first few steps of the path like? Why don't we start with Marybeth?
Thanks, Pete. Congratulations on your book. I really enjoyed reading it. I'm so glad I had a chance to. And it's full of notes here. So here, my Falls Church story is, we didn't actually ever mean to stay here. This was supposed to be a 5-year stop on our journey. My husband actually grew up in the town that your grandmother is from, Riverside, Illinois. And my parents live in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, both really cute little towns. So our goal was to spend a couple years in DC and then move to Doylestown to do all the stuff we're doing here in Doylestown. And we even sold our house. We had a cute little house and nice neighbors, and we're like, nah, we're leaving. We sold our house, and then it didn't work. And then we were in an apartment, and all of a sudden we realized we actually do live here and we want to stay here. So we started looking, and we ended up buying the house 2 doors down from the one we lived in before. And then our neighbor on both times was Jody Acosta, and Phil Acosta lived right between us. So those are definitely long haul heroes. And then we just became involved in the community, started going to the farmer's market. We had kids, and we went to the library and got to know different things, and they started school. And then I got involved in the PTA, actually. And I did as many moms who have decided to stay home with their kids, they get involved in the PTA because they want to be involved with what their kids are doing. And I did something, and then the next year I did something else. And then Cecily Shea was the president-elect. She's another long haul hero. And Cecily said to me, hey, would you be the president-elect next year? And I was like, oh, no. And she asked a few times, and I said, no, not me. And then a couple weeks later, I was with another group of moms, and someone said, we really have to pray for Cecily Shea because she is just really having trouble finding a president-elect. And I thought, did someone set you up for that? She's like, no, I had no idea. So then I thought, all right, if we're praying for this, I should actually become the president-elect. So I did, and got involved in the PTA that way. And then the next year after I was done with the PTA, this great job was listed in the paper, part-time job. And I was like, yeah, I don't need a job yet. And then I looked at it and said, oh, no, that's my job. I want to work for the school. So I did that. And then later, being involved in the schools, I was paying attention to city council and to school board and seeing all the different people that were involved. And I sat there at a meeting one night and I looked down the row, and the whole row was women, moms my age and a little older, a little younger. We were all really involved in what was happening. And then the people who were making the decisions on the other side were not moms that were really involved in what was happening. They were older people who I didn't feel were as connected to the communities. But when I looked down the list and we walked out the door, and I said to my friends, this is crazy. We know what's going on in this city, but we're not the ones making the decisions. We should be the ones. And they all looked at me and said, you can do it. So I did. So it's been a very long process of jumping in, but I feel like it's like the tide keeps pulling me more and more and more into this.
And now you are vice mayor of the town.
Right. And I've been on council.
It starts with volunteering for the PTA, and the riptide will carry you all the way.
There was no deep plan at the beginning, but here we are, and it's been a great thing.
I interviewed 50 long haul heroes for the book, and that story is a very similar pattern of what I hear with commitment is you dive into one thing and then it has its own momentum and you end up being the vice mayor of the town. Let's go to Nikki next. I'd love to hear your kind of commitment origin story. Nikki, you're on mute.
There we go. I'm from a big city, Detroit, Michigan, and it had a very interesting history. Although it was a very large city, the time that I was there, basically my whole life, we had an African-American mayor, Mayor Coleman Young, and basically the city was run by the mayor, the city council, and because it was so large, you didn't really have occasion to talk to those people or meet those people unless it was an election or unless you were in with the in crowd, so to speak. And at that time, I was in with the in crowd. So I knew who made this work or that work or what have you. I decided to go to graduate school at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I was single. And a friend of mine was a teacher, and she said, oh, I know this great guy. You really should meet. I think the two of you would be so good together. You like museums, he likes museums. You like theater, he likes theater. You like music and history. And I go, oh, okay. So as it happened, this ski club that we were both a part of, members of, she and I, was having a bike ride. And the bike ride was coming through Falls Church. And she said, he lives in Falls Church, so we're going to all meet up when the ride goes through Falls Church. So I said, okay. Well, we met. He took us to lunch, cute little restaurant, cute little town. My friend said, any Sparks? And I go, nope. He's not the one for me. But long story short, over a period of about 2 years, we got to be really great friends. And he asked me, he is Edwin B. Henderson, the second. He asked me, because I was a museum person, I worked in museums and whatnot. He said, I've got all of these documents that my grandparents left to me. why don't you come over to my place and see my collection? And I go, yeah, right. Okay. Finally, I came by his home. I was amazed. He really did have a collection of primary source documents, photographs, audio recordings, and I was just blown away. He took me around the community, and where other communities, particularly in my case, in large cities, there's not a there. There is no Tinner Hill neighborhood. There's a sign that says there was once a Tinner Hill neighborhood here, but you had historic homes, you had people, you had all these things that existed right here in Falls Church. And I thought, oh my God, this is a museum person's heaven. I cannot believe, I couldn't understand why everybody was not excited about this gem here in Falls Church. And long story short, he thinks I married him for his collection. I really didn't. It helped, but we got married and I became involved in the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. And as I looked around, I saw what's called the South Washington corridor. And I thought, I walked 3 blocks and I counted at that time 13 different ethnic businesses. And I thought, oh my God, this is fabulous. This is something that really needs to be known about. And that's how I got pulled into telling the story. It was an opportunity that people dream about. It was the kind of thing that you wake up in the morning and you're excited about. It's the kind of thing that your whole life, you read other people find this kind of a discovery. So I came to Falls Church and I started working with the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation and trying to preserve the early civil rights history, African American history here in Falls Church, and to kind of wake people up to let them see exactly what a treasure they had right here in their own hometown. So that's how I got pulled into it.
Thank you for sharing that, Nikki. Your story shares one of the themes that I like talking about in the book, which is that commitments are like an ecosystem where they start flowing into each other, and you find yourself committing to a place, and then you end up committing to a person, and you end up committing to a piece of history and a cause, and it all flows together. And you wake up a couple years later and you're like, I'm living in a new place, I'm married, I have this new leadership role that I'm taking on, this new cause I'm advancing, this new neighborhood I'm celebrating and boostering. It all flows together. That's so wonderful. Let's go to Hannah with your kind of Falls Church commitment origin story.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so we sort of, like Marybeth said, we moved here in 1994, and we thought we would just be here for a little while, and so here we are. And we came from New Jersey, and we were gonna head back down to North Carolina. So this was like on the way, kind of. But anyway, I don't know. For me, it's not one path to one thing. So I always have a hard time making up my mind about things. So I always try my hand on a lot of different things. But for my homeless shelter, I was thinking about that for when I got involved with that. It was just, I happened to like run into someone and they said, would you mind like trying to get some donations for the homeless shelter auction? Or we're going to do an auction. And I was like, oh, I don't think I could do that. Like, I'm not very good at asking people for things. I really don't like to ask people for favors. And so I said, well, I'll just try. I'll like go to a couple stores. And then long story short, I went to like 500 stores, and that was back before email was quite as big a deal. And so you really had to go to the stores, and you got to know people, and I'd always buy something at every store before I asked for the donation, so it was super expensive. But that got me started, and then before I knew it, I was the chair of the homeless shelter, and it was my life, and it was awesome because one, it was something that I believe in wholeheartedly, that everyone deserves a chance to have a home and to get back on their feet. And it's something I really felt strongly about. And there was a real need. There was a need for somebody to come in and help with fundraising and doing that. So sometimes we want to volunteer, but we don't see the need and we don't really know where we fit in. And it just kind of happened like that for me. And that's pretty much my story for that. It was.
And I'll share the personal side of this, which is I went to a single homeless shelter event, and Hannah Jordan was there and said, "Oh, you have to volunteer." And she, who got asked into something, asked me, and then I ended up volunteering at the homeless shelter too, all because someone asked her. So the lesson I'll take away from there for commitment is there is a lot of power in the ask. There's this wonderful person I talked to that I feature in the book, Gracie Olmstead, who I asked her about, what do you do if you feel like you're in a place, this isn't the case, as you can tell, that much in Falls Church, but, in different parts of Falls Church and in different parts of our lives, you sometimes find yourself in a place where you think you're the only one that cares about something. You think you're alone. And the advice she always said is someone needs to be the first mover that says, hey, I know no one's brought this up yet, but I want to be the one that brings it up. And I want to ask you all if you want to be like this, whether it's the smallest thing to, just reaching out to your neighbor or reaching out to someone to be their friend, to the largest thing of we need to change something in this town, or we need to start a big movement in the world, or whatever, or we need to build something or change something. Someone needs to be the first mover. And what you usually discover, Gracie's told me, and it totally resonates, and I think it resonates with your story, Hannah, is that will bring out amazing qualities you never thought were in other people. And you'll always be pleasantly surprised, most of the time, more often than not, be pleasantly surprised that most people will say, thank you for bringing this up. I've been thinking about that in the back of my head, but I've been too scared to bring it up. Or I've been wanting to reach out to you, but no one's ever asked before. Or I don't know if I can do it, but I guess your encouragement is saying I should do it, and your social nudging is saying I should do it, and then you start doing it, and you feel good about doing it. So thank you all for sharing your origin stories. I talk about, for the second question, I talk about in the book 3 of the fears of commitment that I think limit us from diving into things and dedicating ourselves over the long haul. 2 of them are ones people have heard before, and one's a little strange. And I'd love to hear if you've ever had this experience. One is the fear of regret, the classic fear of commitment, which is, and I write about this in chapter 7. You fear that if you commit to something, you're going to wake up 20 years from now and be like, I wish I committed to something else. I wish I moved somewhere else. I wish I married someone else. I wish I wasn't too out there for this cause, or I was in a different cause or a different profession. The second is the fear of missing out, which is, I'm happy with what I chose. I believe in the homeless shelter or something. I believe in this cause. I want to be in this place. But by committing to it, you limit yourself. You take on responsibilities. You take on duties. You have to be a leader. You have to be loyal to the larger thing than yourself. And that means you can't be everything everywhere to everyone. I'm sure Vice Mayor Connelly experiences that. She has to spend these long nights doing city council meetings, and I hear about them in the news press, and I always read, the meeting went until midnight, and I think I know all the members of the city council, and I think about them on the personal level of, oh gosh, they're going to have meetings. I remember the day that UVA was in the finals of the NCAA, they were like trying to rush the meeting so that they could watch the game, but they were all like, we will stay at the meeting if the meeting needs to go beyond the game. So people have the fear of missing out. The third one is not talked about as much, but I feel it's really strongly felt among people my age, which is the fear of association. You fear that if you commit to something, it'll on one hand, threaten your identity or your reputation. Like suddenly you have to be the leader of this thing and known as the person who's part of that thing. Or, when you come out with a political belief, everyone now knows that that's what you believe and you have to stand by it. Or if you have a faith that you want to publicly profess, suddenly you are that, and you have to kind of hold all the tension of the messiness of associating with this thing larger than yourself. And then another half of the fear of association is you got to work with other people when you're in commitments. And as all of you can tell from all these meetings you've had to be in, other people are, sometimes it's tense, sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's annoying, sometimes it's a long way to building community and understanding. And I say you have to pass through the uncertain, uncomfortable valley of community building before you reach the promised land of the joy and comfort of being in tight community. So I'd love to hear, have you experienced any of those fears? How have you navigated those fears, if you have them? And if you never had those fears, give us some tips on how to not have those fears. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I have thoughts. Yeah. So one of the things is feeling like for example, when I was spending hours and hours with homeless shelter stuff, which I really enjoyed, and I met all these new people outside of my bubble, just in the county and not, the greater area. And also it was so eye-opening and wonderful. But at the same time, I would hear about people that were like going out to dinner with their friends. And at a certain point, yeah, there was a little bit of, okay, I am giving up something. And then you just have to be comfortable with that. Like it's, you have that fear and there's some truth to it, but in the end, what you're getting is greater oftentimes. And if you're comfortable with that, then it's okay. And it's also another thing I would say is not everything is permanent, so there are times in your life when you have kids and you have a job and then you happen to fall into this great volunteer thing and there's no time. And then there are times when you can take a deep breath and kind of figure out the balance a little better. So I kind of try to keep a little perspective that it's okay to be a little less busy sometimes, and it's okay to be a little over busy sometimes. It does get a little tricky with kids and, that kind of thing. But yeah, so that's my just immediate thought.
Appreciate you sharing that. And one thing I have a whole thing in the book on in praise of quitting too, because I wanted to say this isn't always, this book is not like a finger waggy moralist book that says in all circumstances, stick with what you've committed to, or it's always going to be good, or you need to do it your whole life.
Yeah.
It's more about in that moment when you're undeciding, it's just a light nudge in the direction of doing more, which, so don't, the first thing I say in the Fear of Regret chapter is the first thing you need to do to start making a commitment is lower the stakes and know it doesn't have to be forever and let it organically grow in you. Marybeth or Nikki, do you have anything on those fears or the messiness of kind of intention that comes with commitment?
Well, with me, one of the things that I've found over the years is that you have to be willing to give up the amount of time that it takes. It's not where you can say, oh, I'm going to give Tinner Hill 2 hours a week. And at the end of 2 hours, that's it. But if you're in a leadership role, it's whatever it takes. It doesn't happen within this timetable. So I found that the best way for me is to involve my family with whatever it is that I'm doing. So if, for example, we're doing a music festival, my adult kids come here from Michigan to work for the festival. And people will say, well, couldn't you find somebody from Falls Church to do that? Well, yes, but not like they're going to do it because they love me. They know, oh, Mama's really tired. She only got 3 hours of sleep last night. So I'm going to do this, this, and this. so that she can get off of her feet. That seemed to be the way that I could navigate best the overcommitment of myself and my time, is by having my family believe in it with me. And my husband at times is like, well, you were the one who volunteered to do this. How did that get on my plate? But it's like, we're in this together. You've got to help me. And it seems to work. Usually what I'm committed to is something that is for the good of not just myself or my immediate family or immediate community, but it's something that has much larger ramifications. And when we talk about where we're going from here, I mean, I've had my youngest son, who's now 30, say, Mom, you did that back in Detroit, and now you're doing it again. Like, yes, but look at how far we've come. So that's the thing that I often find. I don't really find regret as you're going through it. You have to do what's right in your spirit. What really, my mother was a very wise woman, and she at one point told me, I was being bullied by one of the neighborhood girls, and I came home crying, and she said, well, you either will have to go out there and fight her, or come in here and fight me. And I was just, oh my God, oh my. Well, of course, we go down, I see Dorothy, we stand there, we talk it out, we're fine. But over the years, I finally realized what my mother really meant. It wasn't just a physical altercation. It's if you don't fight those things outside of yourself, in those quiet moments, in the still of the night, you cross-examine yourself. I should have done this, or why didn't I do that? So it's either fight it outside, or your inside is fighting and tearing you apart. So being able to believe enough that what you're doing is important, no matter how small it is, planting flowers in the neighborhood, whatever it is, if you believe enough in the deepest part of your soul, you don't really second guess every day because you're too busy getting the job done.
I love that. You know, I in an original draft of the book, it got cut in a later draft. I had this wonderful quote from former President Obama, where he said, anytime he felt stuck, he remembered that it was about the work. And that's what made him find a path forward. And it's very similar to what you're saying, which is that when you have that purpose, it shows you the way. It gives you peace and meaning. You don't have those constant, he said, all those dramas in your head of, am I succeeding or am I failing? Am I on the inside or am I on the outside? That goes away when you say there's important stuff to be done. There's important work to do. What a powerful message. Marybeth, anything on the fears of regret or missing out or associating with other people?
Well, the associating one is interesting. And before I was on city council, it was really easy to sit around with my friends and go, can you believe they did that? Why did they do that? What are they talking about? And then once that was a really bad decision. Why did they say it that way? Like, because it's easy to second guess as you're watching other people do the work. And then when you're the person sitting up there in the dais and you have to vote and have an opinion and say and explain why you're voting one way or the other, terrifying. That is a huge, and you really have to, you have to face those fears, and you have to stand up for what way you believe in. So I was started on city council in January, and then we had a vote for my first budget was in April. So I was relatively new on council, but I had been following budget for years and knew everything. But it came down to, as it always does in Falls Church, a half cent or a cent on the tax rate. Are we going to raise the tax or not raise the tax? And as the budget process continued, I ended up somehow aligning myself with Phil Duncan, who wanted to we wanted to keep the tax rate flat or only reduce it a penny, but that meant not fully funding the schools. Well, I was elected as a schools candidate. So I had to sit there on the dais, and my first big vote was to say, okay, I'm not going to vote to fund everything that the schools asked for, which was really hard. And had you been following the process all along, everyone knew that's where we were going to end up. But the people that were just waiting and watching and that had been advocating and voting for me were so angry the next day. and I didn't do a good job of explaining it on the dais because I was like, I don't know what to do. And then I went into the high school a couple days later, and one of the teachers said to me, come here, let's work on how you're going to explain things next time to show where you are. But it was really scary to align myself with the people who were saying, don't fully fund the schools. And it has all worked out. It was hard. And in the end, it worked out okay. So I think sometimes when you need to align yourself with something that you're not quite sure how it's all going to look, you do need to explain it, understand it, and be able to say it in a way that makes a lot of sense.
A final question for the panel before I want to save some time at the end for questions from people watching out there. Thank you, everyone who's still watching out there. So glad to have you listening. Part of the message, I talk a lot about the impact of long haul heroes. I talk about, the only way we can make change, the only way we can build things, the only way we can mentor people is over the long run. Important things happen slow. They happen organically. They're the building of relationships, not the engineering of a perfect blueprint. So I talk about impact, but I really also want to say, I really try to say in this book that, and from my interviews with 50 long haul heroes who worked at things for a long time, that commitment is also a path to joy. That it is it brings you, out of, if you can overcome the fear of regret, you can have the deep power of purpose. If you overcome the fear of association, you can have the comfort of deep community. If you overcome the fear of missing out of the latest novelty, you can have the deepest novelty of all, being able to see your kid turn 5, being able to master that craft, being able to be celebrated as the elder of a community. What's more novel than that? That's what you should fear missing out on. All of that adds up to, I start the book with this poem from this wonderful poet, Jack Gilbert. And he says, at the end of a long haul, you see the beauty that is of many days, steady and clear. It is the normal excellence of long accomplishment. And there's a certain level of serenity, a certain level of joy that comes at the end of a long haul. And so what I'd love to hear, we've talked about some of the difficulties of it in this last question. What are the joys that you have seen and experienced from being involved in our community, from sticking with these causes and organizations and people and relationships and place that you care about? I'd love to hear about some of what's awaiting young people if they decide to make similar commitments.
I think a huge part of it is friendship. Is the friends that I have are the people that are here that I interact with, that my kids went to kindergarten with, that the people that I've worked on projects that have been hard projects, that we get through them, and on the other side you have friendship. I just was involved, and Nikki as well, in the Women's History Walk, and this group of women who volunteered to be the steering committee this year created a women's history group, and many of them have been friends for years and years and years, and they're working together now to recognize other women and also themselves. So they were telling stories about each other, and remember when we did this, and it was just great to see how all that became a community, those little friendships, one heart at a time, and then you become a community. And can I tell my Gary Laporta story? Because
Yes, I would love to hear that.
So Gary Laporta owned a dollhouse shop in Falls Church for a long time. Gary was like the least likely person to own a dollhouse shop ever. He was tall, barrel-chested, former Marine. He had like a ponytail, which he cut off eventually, but he owned this dollhouse shop, and that's when I got to know him. And then he lost the dollhouse shop, and then he started working for the city and volunteering with the Chamber of Commerce and doing all sorts of different things. And he got very involved in the schools at the same time that I was starting to work there. And he was just an integral part of everything that was happening in the city. And Gary died suddenly a little more than 2 years ago. And at his funeral, we were in the Episcopal Church, and his nephew came in. I had never met his nephew. Other people had, but his nephew was talking about Gary and saying, boy, he was in the Vietnam War and he suffered from PTSD and he had a really hard life. And what I saw when he became involved in Falls Church is that it transformed him. So it's easy to say, I want to do something to make a difference in my community. But for a lot of us, all of us, I think, the community makes a difference for us too. So Gary never would have had this wonderful, joyful last 15 years of his life had he not taken a chance on getting involved in the community and then being able to give back. And we gave back to him and he gave back to us, and it all, worked together to create this wonderful relationship. So he is very much missed, but I feel like that's a really important lesson.
What a beautiful story on this theme. It's amazing. You see these people around in your town, and I'll say a thing from the book that I just experienced right now, which is one of the things I say in the book is that when you commit to a community, the community opens up to you, and it becomes ever more magical. It's like a kaleidoscope that only happens after you dive in. And you see Gary Laporta walking around. We used to see him walking around in town, but then by getting to know him, you get to know all these parts about him. He gets to know all these parts about our town. There's nothing more amazing of a story or beautiful thing than everyone else around us. And that only is opened up if we actually take the time to get to know each other. What a beautiful message. Hannah or Nikki, do you have anything on the joy at the end of a long haul?
One of my fun stories was just how sometimes I would be walking around, the Giant or something, and I would see some of the people that had spent time in the homeless shelter, and after they had gotten out, and they would call me over and we just chat. I mean, that was so rewarding because my eyes were open to a whole different world that I had never experienced, and to really see the people living in the Falls Church homeless shelter as members of our community, and they're important, wonderful people, and who have these interesting lives, and that was fun to me. So I don't just run into PTA moms or neighbors, but I also would run into my friends, these residents or former residents. Also, one time we had an event at Clarendon's Beach Shack, the taxes are big, long haul heroes in Falls Church. And so we had this event where we invited the residents to talk to the volunteers, just any volunteer that had done overnight duty or evening duty. And there's these guys that just spent a lot of time writing about how much they appreciated it and what it had meant to them and how it had changed their lives. And it was way more than I ever expected. And it was just one of those moments where it's like, oh my God, this is just amazing. And you can't have too many, you can't expect moments like that all the time, but it's really nice when you get one. So anyway,
there's this researcher that heavily inspired this book named Robert Putnam, who writes about how to rebuild community in America. And he says, there's two types of community that we need. We need bonding community. We need to get closer to people like us. That's important. It's important to have groups where, you aren't alone and you get to connect over all the things that are similar about you. But he says the other thing that keeps our country going and sticking together is bridging community too. And usually the moment of where people reach out to someone that's different than us, that experienced a different path of life than us, and you need a good healthy dose of bonding community and bridging community as well. And the moment where those bridges happen on an individual level are people's commitments to being, navigating the process of bringing people who are different together. And I'm so grateful for what you've done, Hannah, and all of the Falls Church Homeless Shelter of being part of that bridging of the kind of different corners of the Falls Church experience. Nikki, anything on the joy on the other side of a long haul? You're on mute. Nikki, I think you might be on mute. Oh, you don't got anything. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, taking a pass. Let's do a Q&A. If there's any from the audience, if Amber wants to come back, great, in these final
Hi
minutes.
there. Hi, everybody. Very good conversation. And we do have a few questions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pop them up here. Emily says, as a teacher, I'm always looking for ways to get my students more involved. What fostered your civic mindedness when you were in elementary school?
I have thank you so much for that, Emily. It's so wonderful to have you here. And Emily herself, she might not reveal this, is a amazing long haul hero teacher as well. I have a section in the book on the difference between education for advancement and education for attachment. Part of education is about your own individual advancement. It's about giving you tools to be free. Giving you tools that'll help you achieve your own personal individual dreams for yourself. That's part of education. One of my challenges in the book that I'm giving to readers is to try to push our education systems to also have education for attachment, which is education that's not just about helping you as an individual, but education that attaches you to things bigger than yourself. There's this wonderful philosopher, Alfred North Whitehead, who said, we need more education that evokes reverence and duty, that puts you in awe of things greater than yourself, that makes you feel responsible for things bigger than yourself. And I lay out 4 different things that have been helpful to me in feeling that connection. And I'd love to hear if one person on the panel wants to share anything else. We have a lot of teachers, and both formal and informal on the panel. The 4 I talk about are crafts, teams, elders, and heroes. So crafts, things that connect you. I start the book with a story of Mr. Ballou, who's this kind of famous figure in Falls Church. And he ran his classes totally different than every other teacher. Every other teacher marches you through the units. Mr. Ballou says, you are about to build a relationship with this engineering device. Like, you're about to build a relationship with a specific art craft. You're about to build a relationship with what a fly loft is and how it works. And it's that craft education of not just marching you through units of kind of abstract things, but connecting you to a physical craft outside of yourself really helps train people in commitment. Teams are another form of that, where you learn about how to work with other people on a shared goal. Elders are an important part. The data is pretty clear that we are becoming more and more age segregated. And one of the things we can do is push against that by saying, let's get more young people talking to old people. You talk to your teachers, but I had this wonderful teacher, Mrs. Barry, in middle school, who started a thing called Grandparents Club, where she sent a bunch of middle schoolers to the Sunrise Retirement Home to help build those relationships. And even these wonderful groups I've seen in Falls Church, where you just try to get 5th graders talking to 1st graders about what they've learned about things. Or when Evan Hom pulled me aside when I was in 8th grade basketball and showed me, and he was a senior, like a godlike senior at the time, and said, let me tell you how you're lifting weights completely wrong in the weight room. Apologies to Evan, he never succeeded in teaching me how to be athletic. But it was that's a moment where you learn about something from elders. And then I talk about a culture of heroes, which is kind of a virtual elder of sorts, which is telling the stories of the long haul heroes in history that built all the things that we hold precious today. And a great example of that is like what happened with the Women's History Walk, by making these historic figures present. And I saw on some of these signs, I didn't know that program with the school existed because of that person who fought for it, or I didn't know that that park existed because that person fought for it. By seeing examples of people who went on their own commitments, that's a powerful way to do it. Do any of you on the panel have any different advice on how you get people involved, especially young people involved in commitments or community life generally?
So I just ask people. It's the power of the ask, like you said, and getting your whole family involved and getting their friends involved and getting everybody you know to ask their. So that's one way. And the other thing I was just thinking is one of the things I love are swim teams, because that's multi-age. It's so awesome with in these neighborhood pools. If you know, that's one of the few places where it's just part of the team. It's all the way from seniors and coaches down to the little kids. And that's one of the things I love about it. But yeah, I think it's asking and then begging maybe at first, and then and then I don't know. That's not really a magical solution, but you know.
Nope, Pete, you're muted.
So any other questions, Amber?
Yep. So we have two. I'm going to kind of combine them a little bit because I think they may go well together. So Stephen Spitz asked, why did you write the book? And then Asher Morse says, what sorts of big structural changes in colleges, towns, and the wider economy could make the counterculture commitment more widespread and accessible? I'm guessing that was a little bit of why you wrote the book, so that's why I combined them.
Yeah, so I'll end on Stephen's question because it's more to the heart of everything and we're coming up on time, but I'll start with Asher's question. The first half of the book is it's kind of in the second person about an individual. It's about what are you experiencing in infinite browsing mode? Where are you experiencing how are you experiencing the fears of commitment? But then the second half of the book is all about what in our structure, in our politics, in our culture, in our institutions are hurting kind of our paths to commitment. And so I talk about economics, morality, and education. So I talked a bit about education, saying there's a lot of education for advancement, but we need to move towards an education for attachment. I talked about it at the younger ages with crafts and teams and elders and heroes. At the older ages, it's, having mission statements and talking about kind of moral causes and justice causes at a college and graduate level as well is another way to talk about the responsibilities that come with learning at the college and grad school ages. That's kind of education for attachment there. In the on morality, I talk about a lot of our culture tells stories about unhooking you from unjust commitments, and that's totally amazing and totally important. And so we tell a lot of Hollywood stories about someone had an inherited commitment that was unjust and they freed themselves from it. But we also need to tell the second half of that story, which is that in addition to freeing yourself from unjust commitments, we also need to talk about the dedication that is required of affirmatively making commitments. We need to have critique, but we also have to have imagination. We need to have liberation, but we also have to have dedication. We need to have, tearing down bad systems. We also need to learn how to build up good systems and do both. I call it the liberation, dedication two-step. And then on the economy, I get into some of my political opinions here, which is that you can have an economy that supports stable communities and stable commitments, or you can have an economy that says money is more important than people. And so I talk a little bit about some of the institutions like labor unions, community businesses, small cultures of small businesses, cultures of local communities choosing local businesses over big international ones. The hard line project of antitrust and all of the justice causes that keep people in their homes and keep people healthy and secure and educated enough to participate in things. I tell a story of you can have 50 community enterprises, or you can have one giant efficient company that does it more efficient than those 50. You might think you're getting all this efficiency from that one giant one that knocks out Main Street, but you're not going to get the Kiwanis Club or the Little League or the Band Booster sponsorship plaques in that one giant entity. You're going to get that in the Clarendons and the Browns Hardwares of the world. So that is some of the political stuff. I'll end with this, since we're at time. Stephen's question: why did I write this book? I wrote this book because it's really dark, I think, for a lot of young people. A lot of young people are getting cynical, they're getting hopeless, they feel confused. Sometimes it feels like a cultural desert. It's lonely, you don't know where to turn, trust in institutions is way down. And there's a lot of books out there that are about why everything's wrong. I've read a lot of them, I love them, it's very important to learn about that. But we also need to learn about the path out. And I wanted to write, there's this poem I put at the end of the book that's really important to me. It's kind of the heart of the message of this book. It's from the farmer philosopher Wendell Berry. And he said, in the dark of the moon, in flying snow, in the dead of winter, war spreading, families dying, the world in danger, I walk the rocky hillside sowing clover. What I love about that message is that even in the darkest of times, you can sow clover. You can create a living alternative in the midst of the darkness. You can light a candle. You can plant a seed in the cracks of the desert. And the moment where that happens is the moment where you make a commitment. And we can reforest in the desert. That's the message I wanted to send to people. And the source of that reforesting, the moment of that is, the seed of that is a commitment to a long haul.
That's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, we are at the end of our time. So I want to thank everybody, Hannah, Nikki, Marybeth, and Pete, and everybody who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and learned a little something. And just wanted to remind everybody, I did drop a link in the comments because Pete is going to be coming by the store tomorrow to sign and personalize books. So if you would like to get a signed copy, or maybe you want to purchase a signed copy for, someone who's graduating college or something, might be a great gift. You can get those, and he'll be coming by to sign. So get those orders in. We can ship anywhere. So just add that part. So thanks, everybody. I hope you all have a nice evening, and we'll see you later. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
I get the